Welcome to Taking Stock. I'm Amanda Lang. Coming up on the show, as Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. meet this week, what's at stake for the smaller players? And more Canadians are working in the gig economy. We're taking a closer look at the pros and cons. And efforts to make housing more affordable could backfire for existing homeowners. That's all ahead. First, for the week that was in business, it's time for the briefs. Canada's Prime Minister met with the leaders of the United States and Mexico for a trilateral this week. On the agenda, everything from working out the backlog in the Nexus travel system to Buy American trade policies. The generally friendly meeting is important at a time when more manufacturing is being brought back to North America. Separately, Canada and Mexico won a trade dispute that will allow auto producers to make parts in those countries that still qualify for American content rules.
This decision reinforces the agreement we all make to do them here and do them together, and helps to underpin those $17 billion of car maker decisions in Canada for the next 10, 20 years.
U.S. inflation continued to moderate in December, falling to 6.5%, exactly what economists predicted. Much of the drop was due to cheaper gas prices, which declined 9.4% in the month. The read on inflation leaves the central bank in the U.S. in the same predicament as ours. Prices are moderating, but are still way above the zone the banks want to see. That suggests borrowing rates could continue to rise in the near term. Tens of thousands of Canadians could default on their mortgages in the months ahead, according to the banks who hold those mortgages. Those at risk represent a small proportion of the total, anywhere from 0.5% at some banks to 2% at others. So the risk is not to the well-being of the banks. It may, though, weaken the economy as consumers adjust their spending. The World Bank once again cut its growth outlook for the global economy, warning that at 1.7%, its prediction for growth is third weakest in decades. Most of the downgrade is due to a drastic cut in expectations for the U.S. economy, now seen growing at just 0.5% next year. The bank noted that only the global financial crisis and the pandemic produced weaker growth. More than 4,000 flights into and out of the U.S. were delayed Wednesday morning after a key part of the air travel system failed. The U.S. Federal Aviation Association said the Notice to Air Missions Systems, which alerts pilots to any obstructions to takeoff, failed overnight. The network was operating again by about 9:30 a.m. Eastern, but the ripple effects continued for hours across North America.
These kinds of disruptions should not happen, and my primary interest, now that we've gotten through the immediate disruptions of the morning, is understanding exactly how this was possible and exactly what steps are needed to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Executives from Sunwing, Air Canada, and WestJet appeared before a parliamentary committee this week to review what happened in the travel chaos before Christmas. MPs also heard from officials from airports. The hearings are aimed at understanding what went so wrong for the airlines. Still to be determined how affected passengers might be compensated. Via Rail apologized to passengers affected by a derailment on its system and said they will receive full refunds plus travel credits. And those are your business briefs. With manufacturing increasingly coming back to the United States and a renewed emphasis on Buy American, how can Canada make sure it remains a vital player in the U.S. supply chain systems? Dennis Darby is President and CEO of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association. Dennis, thanks for being with us.
Hello, how are you doing?
Well, we're well. And of course, when we watch these leaders, our prime minister get together with the leaders of the U.S. and Mexico, we wonder how much real work happens. But things do happen. What is it that manufacturers hope are on the agenda when our leader meets with these two other players in the North American system?
Well, these kinds of meetings are really important to remind everybody about the importance of the CUSMA deal, of the trade that goes on, and especially in manufacturing. For Canada in particular, 2/3 of everything we sell goes to the U.S. in terms of manufactured goods, where it's about 3/4 of everything that we sell to the U.S. in total. So if you think about it, it's really important that the leaders talk about how they can work together, and that's what we were looking for, to talk about how do we deal with what is really a generational or more shift in, for example, the transportation sector, how we make cars, vehicles, and it's that great opportunity to talk about that.
And of course, we do see that it's really important to stay on the ball because we very narrowly saw a policy change in the U.S. that would have cut Canada out of a pretty important part of the electric vehicle market, for instance. We can make a difference in those ways. Do you worry about this emphasis on protectionism? It's always been there kind of under the water in every country, but certainly in America. Is it worse now than usual?
Well, I think one thing in particular, under the free trade agreement, of course, we have very few impediments between the three countries. But as you said, countries act in their own best interest, and the U.S. really made its mark by deciding to really go all in on advanced manufacturing. Probably not because of Canada or because of Mexico, will probably be because of China. But because of that change, that Inflation Reduction Act, it really puts a lot of pressure on Canada and on Mexico to make sure that we get inside the tent. Like you said, we got in the tent in terms of cars or vehicles made in Canada are included for the consumer discounts in the U.S., which is so critical because so much of our production goes there. But the other side of it, which are the incentives for manufacturers, the incentives the U.S. has put in place to draw manufacturers into the U.S., Canada does have to respond. Those are not helpful kinds of changes.
Dennis, for a long time, a job in manufacturing was a really good job. It was well paid. It was well protected. The benefits were great. Is that still true in Canada?
Oh, yes, it is still true. We pay higher than average. Continues to be a huge shortage, especially of high-tech jobs, in terms of skilled trades. It's more important than ever because the U.S. economy has been so strong. It has continued to pull Canada's manufacturing sector so that, we have a surplus in our balance of trade in manufacturing, for example, with the U.S. We don't with anybody else. And so it's so critical that Canada get its fair share, especially of electrification, of the battery manufacture. And I think the governments are seized with that to try to find a way to do this on a North American basis. So that's the real opportunity here. And
are we offering the right training so that people who do want jobs but aren't necessarily have the right skills can get them?
Well, I think there's lots of efforts underway right now in Canada and at each of the provinces. And indeed, we do need more. We need more immigrants who come in with skills. And we also need to really ramp up our community college system because we need the next generation of workers, especially in these high-tech jobs.
Dennis, so good to have you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Dennis Darby, President and CEO of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association. Coming up, the latest on the gig economy shows that it is only getting bigger. Is that a good thing? Stay with us.